Hello and welcome to the Binge Thinker, episode 8. My name is Jameel Raymond. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. We are talking about part 3 of my perception series. We are talking about all things cognition, a cognitive process, how we think, what we think, how it governs our lives. And I'll give you a few life updates as well. Apologies for the week off to my loyal few. I had a lot of things happen over the last week. Very busy boy. Things are in motion, but it's a very exciting time. It's a very, very exciting time. Fuck, we may as well just kick straight into it. What have I been up to the last week? So, since we last caught up, I've had a few big things happen. I've had a couple of big gigs go off. The outdoor gig that I was running kicked off last Saturday, a few days ago. I've run 3 gigs in 5 days, which is no small feat. It's a hard job to be a producer. It's a difficult and often thankless job when you think about all of the administration that goes behind running a gig. It is kind of thankless, but I spent a career in sales and account management for a toxic company, so I'm used to having thankless jobs. But I find it really rewarding. It was a lot of fun to put on an event for the people of Footscray with the outdoor gig. It was a great experience overall. I will not deny that I was a little bit disappointed by the slightly less turnout than we expected, but that is actually what happens when you don't commit any money to it. It was a free show, and I keep remembering that if people don't value anything, if they don't have a commitment to it, they may likely not show up if they've got a better option in mind. So that's fine. I totally get it. Everyone got paid, thanks to the Maribyrnong Council. People had a great time that were there, got a lot of great feedback, really, really positive and heartwarming feedback from the audience. We caught up with a few of the punters after the show. They plowed us with free drinks and a few other things as well. It's fun to be recognized in the community for the things that you love to do. Which is to make people laugh and, give them something to look forward to in public as opposed to being locked into their house for the last 2 years. So that was, a lot of fun. Also, I had comedy at Jambo a couple of days ago as well. It's one of the first gigs we've run at Footscray Comedy Club. The first show that we have not sold out in about 16 or 17 shows in a row since we actually started comedy at Jambo. So it was bound to happen. There's a few reasons. We probably comedied out everyone with all the gigs we had in the area, but still had a decent crowd in. They absolutely loved it. It was really warm, very generous with the laughter, really glad to be there. You could tell. And you know what? It is just fun. It doesn't matter. The numbers are there. If people appreciate what you're doing, it's a good experience for all. I'm glad to do it. And then the third gig that I had was Pride Bar. I run a queer gig, Pride Comedy, at part of our Footscray Bar. And that's a lot of fun. And that is a great gig. There's something to be said about queer comedy. I do feel like a bit of an outsider because I am not queer. I'm a cis-het male from what I understand of that jargon or that subtext. But you know what? The queer comedy, it's got a lot of things that non-queer comedy could learn from, a lot of great values and attributes that would be taken into regular comedy and we need to lean more into. A couple of the big things is that there's a lot more performance in queer comedy. They're not afraid to throw in some music or some cues or a bit of drama and a bit more emotion into their comedy. And it does great. All these extra comedic elements, it creates for great intrigue, it builds tension, it just makes it a more high fidelity experience. And I think it's a lot of fun. It's something that I wish I could incorporate more into my own comedy. I've thought about adding music or something like that. I don't know if I'd ever use cues the way that they do, but certainly incorporating music into my comedy at some point would be great. Another thing that they've got that is a big benefit to the comedians, Jesus Christ, and the comedic community is that because they're all queer and they all relate at a certain level, it makes the material a lot, I wouldn't say easier, but it's more relatable quickly, and it creates comfort, and it creates a more unified room a lot quicker because they relate, they're at ease. From what I can feel out is that they're so used to being potentially antagonized or at risk of being queer, but if they're in this space where they're accepted and, there is a lot more empathy and understanding about their experience, which is the positive side of potentially what a safe space is supposed to be, then they relax, they get into the jokes more, the jokes hit harder, the jokes can get heavier, and they can take more risks. As a result, people have a much better time. And that's all that really matters when you go into comedy, is that people get so tied up in the details and people get so self-involved, and the more that you can curate an experience where people feel comfortable laughing and being a cohesive unit of energy and understanding the jokes together, the better experience that they're going to have in comedy. And they can do that really well. So it's been a lot of fun to run that show, even if I don't perform. It's good to just see people enjoying themselves, all relating. And it's, been part of the ethos that I've been spewing out here for the last few weeks, is about, just having a room full of people enjoying themselves. And that's it. So it's a lot of fun, but fuck, I'm exhausted. There's a lot of admin that goes into running these shows that, again, is pretty thankless, and I sort of keep in the back end, but it keeps the machine going. So I've had to do that over the last few days. I'm very glad that I've had this week off. Next week, I start a new job. I'm going back into work full time, working for another technology company, Cisco, for those playing at home, just back into technology sales and consulting. I've realized that for a while now that, all the things that I'm doing don't pay the bills. And the best way for me to make money is to go back into work so I can fund all of these projects and dreams that I'm working on. So very glad to be going back to work next week. Very thankful that the start date was pushed out by a week due to some administrative BS, but it's definitely worked in my favor. What else have we got going on? Oh yeah, the big one. Been talking about it for a while, but Aussie Comedy Network launched this week. It's been many months in the making. I've been very excited about it. So I'm running a few different campaigns to support the launch. One, it's all very, very content heavy because content is king. I'm in the attention economy. I need to be generating attention. I need to be greasing the wheels of the platforms that want attention because that is their business model, so all the platforms. So over the next few weeks, I'll probably give you a little catch up and a little bit of a diary on how each of the campaigns are going. I wouldn't mind doing like a full debrief after each campaign. That's just the marketer and the nerd in me that wants to test, reiterate, move forward. The feedback so far has been immensely positive, which has been really great. Even I've only been posting quite frequently for the last 3 or 4 days. I can see the momentum, more likes, more follows. The algorithms are starting to notice me. And yeah, all I've just got to keep doing is keep being persistent, keep the machine flowing, and see how we go, really. It is one giant experiment of what I'm trying to do. I think I've done enough research to understand what the platforms want, how to give them what they need, so they give me the attention that I need to grow the business. So yeah, we'll just keep testing, keeping it experimental. And I've got to keep it experimental because there is no blueprint for what I'm doing. And also, by treating it as an experiment and not necessarily a pass-fail, which is what happens to me in the past, is where I would think that every single decision would determine the outcome of success of what I was doing. Keeping an experimental mindset, which is actually something that I learned from Tim Ferriss, it's definitely helpful to maintain this perspective of, okay, nothing's broken, no one dies from what I'm doing here. It's all feedback. There's no mistakes. They're only mistakes if you make them twice. So if you can take the lesson and keep iterating and keep, tweaking as you go along, making sure that you are cognizant of the learnings and the feedback that you receive from whatever you do, you just keep building. It's just building those 1%, taking the feedback, what have you learned, reapplying it, getting a bit smarter every single time, and you will succeed. So that is my strategy for now. So to give you a little bit of, I'll give you a little taster, because I think I've talked about it on other areas anyway. What I'm trying to do now with Aussie Comedy Network is build the platform of engagement. What that means is I need to get eyes on Aussie Comedy Network. Simple as that. We live in the attention economy. All social media thrives on attention. If I need a media company, I need the people's eyes to create value to see what I'm doing. So the phase one, and this is a little, I think the actual what I'm doing is a little tasty treat for the loyal listeners of this podcast, is that I've got about 1 to 200 pieces of content, at least 120 pieces of content that I've been accumulating from different creators that have been part of the network, have been part of the first wave. And I've been accumulating those and dressing them up, branding them with ACN branding, editing them a little bit to make them fit the more popular formats, popular formats of what's happening in social media right now. So TikToks, under a minute, Reels, same thing, just to compete with TikTok. And I am just firing salvo after salvo of content consistently at the platforms with the right hashtags and getting the timings right. And just, I'm going to make the algorithms notice me just by sending them content frequently, as aggressively as I can. Oh, not as aggressively as I can, but it's an aggressive process. Like, I'm posting 4 times a day across at least 3 platforms. I'm sort of trying YouTube Shorts out, but that's a question mark at the moment. They haven't really developed that platform. I think it's going to be a poor competitor to TikTok. I don't know if it'll really last, but hey, I've got to kiss YouTube's ass as well. I'm paying rent on all of these platforms. I got to give them what they want. If I was building my own infrastructure, I could do whatever I liked, but I got to let them, I got to play their way, so to speak. So putting out a shitload of content, letting the algorithms work in my favor, and then maintaining that cadence after an initial burst. Hopefully we've got a decent enough following that'll maintain the sharing and the spreading of ideas and content, and then we start the virality machine going. So how that works is that I'm trying to aim to get 20,000 TikTok followers, 10,000 Instagram followers, and 5,000 Facebook followers as soon as I can. Ideally, I mean, in my head, I had it within 30 days. That's probably unrealistic. I tend to shoot for the moon, as I do, and that's fine. I can accept that. But I'll see what happens. There really is no deadline for this, and that's what I have to keep reminding myself, is that there's no end to this. This ends when I give up, and I ain't giving up anytime soon. So ideally, it's just those numbers, 20K TikTok, 10K Instagram, 5K Facebook, as soon as possible. I think, and that'll be a good groundwork to create more engagement, particularly with the comedy community, right? And why that's important is that I go from pushing out into the comedy community to generate value and be like, hey, let me have your content. And I'll give you free visibility, and you get to keep all the downstream benefits of that visibility with followers, etc. But they go, you only got 300 followers on your platforms. Why would I do that? And it's the most common pushback that I get. And I go, fair enough, right? You know, a lot of comedians and content creators put a lot of effort into what they do, and they sense the danger of, oh, I've put all this effort in, but you want me just to give it to you for nothing? And I get that. I totally get that, because they're not really seeing the value up front. But if they think on a broader scale and they buy into what I'm actually doing long term, for the most part, and I'd say 95+% of people get on board, or they understand that, hey, it's no really different from someone sharing their content with their friends. In fact, it's just a more guaranteed way of sharing their content if they're a good creator. So once that happens, once I get to that 10K, I will have I use Instagram as the main one just because I am an Instagram mind. I'm still adapting to TikTok. Once I get to 10K followers on Instagram, I will have more of a following than 90+% of Australian comedians on Instagram, which is kind of sad, really. But that's because we have been relatively slow to the social media marketing perspective of what comedy is, which is a lot bigger in America and there's a lot more reach because there's a lot more potential market. That's what I've said for weeks and months now, is that we are a very underdeveloped comedy market for how big we are relative to the rest of the world in comedy. And that's primarily because we're an English-speaking country that's bastardized the different types of comedy that have come in, which is particularly English and American comedy. So once that is done, that will help pull content to me, as opposed to me having to reach out to people and go, hey, can I use your content? I will expect that people will come to me and go, hey, can you share my content? Would be great. Let's collaborate, which is fine, which is exactly what I want. I'm not going to be like, oh, where are you now, huh? Where were you when the struggle started? But people always doubt you till it's done. And that's fine. It's fine to have a healthy amount of skepticism, particularly when you're doing something completely different to what everyone else is doing. So that's phase one, is just engaging on the platforms, showing that I can pull attention quite effectively to the platform. That helps the content that I can curate become higher quality and more effective, because more established acts who are probably fucking hilarious in person and have got great content but cannot be fucked being the marketer and being the promoter that I am to get their content out there. It helps that process. And that's what makes it mutually beneficial, because comedians generally don't give a fuck about marketing themselves or know how to. And that's always been my value proposition about this from day one, is to go, hey, I'm a marketer. I'm a good promoter. I'm a killer salesperson. Let me sell you for nothing, and then let's see what happens. And then also with 10K and 20K followers, particularly on Instagram and TikTok, that creates constant engagement over a decent segment. So any good bits will be shared into the broader ecosystem of my target audiences. And I think that's a good rolling amount to just compound on, really. It's almost like people say the first $1 million you make is always the hardest. And then once you've got over that, you're probably a lot smarter about the way you get to that million. You've learned a few things. You've got the capital and the social proof that you are capable of creating money and creating value. And then it just compounds from there. So it's a very similar hump when it comes to developing a following, I think. So that's what I'm at now, is just I've got a team behind me, Gavin, and I've got a couple of others that are probably going to help out soon with some other projects around Aussie Comedy Network. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm posting all this stuff multiple times a day. Thankfully, I've found some software that can automate this process for me, which is pretty cheap. And it takes a lot of the stress away from me, because it's tedious. It's tedious work. It's a lot of copy paste. I have to use 4 different applications, copy and paste it, upload it, have the different hashtags and captions. It's just boring, repetitive work, which is completely what I'm against. I'm very dynamic in the way that I work and do things. So, yeah, it's a bit tedious, but what I do now is I collect the information of what I'm doing. I understand the little tips and tricks and proclivities. I build a workflow and a process about how this works end to end. I make it as efficient as I can. I document it. And then I will pass that off to an intern or another junior that will join the team and help run that process for me. And I'll just sit back, iterate, improve, provide feedback, but then also give that person that opportunity to create their own perspective and put their own shine on it, because I'm only one person. And that'll probably be, a kid that's a lot more social media savvy than me, because the fact that I'm on TikTok makes me feel like a pedophile sometimes. Thankfully, the algorithms haven't shown me any of the fucking creepy little kid shit, dumb little girls dancing on it, whatever. But, yeah, I still feel like it's a necessity to be on social media, and I am getting better at not treating it like that and being a platform that is useful and that I can create value in. But, I'll take it day by day. I've been on social media for over 15 years now, and I have never been a power user, so to speak, but I'll have to be one, and that's fine. So, yeah, that's been my week. It's been getting up early so I can prepare myself to have a good routine, preparing for my new job, so I can get everything I need done in the morning, have my morning routine, start this new role, learn a whole bunch of new shit in the new role. Whilst I'm doing that, I have to spin the plates of engagement, use of my social media launch. So that'll be a bit of fun. Thankfully, this job is predominantly remote, so I can just, run multiple computers at once or multiple devices at once, just step away, a couple of taps, back to the job at hand. And the good thing is, with my day job is that if I'm hitting my sales number, no one's going to bother me. So nobody's going to question me. No one micromanages me, and I don't allow them to micromanage me, quite honestly. My bosses are in India and Sydney, so there's no one going to be breathing down my neck. And I've been in sales long enough to know is if you hit your number, no one gives a shit. Just keep hitting your number, deliver the figures, you'll be fine. You can do whatever the hell you want. So it's a nice little balance in my life of having a good paying job that'll help fund the business and the growth of what I'm doing versus giving me the time and flexibility to, jump in and check my metrics and keep the posting going, keep that engagement going, not to mention incorporating some sort of software to automate a lot of processes for me and then eventually delegating that to someone else who I can develop, hopefully, and, help them grow. One of the things that I'm big on in this organization is it's a reflection of me as a leader and what I want people in my team and who work with me to feel and experience by having me as a leader and bringing people up from the ground, from the grassroots, rewarding loyalty. I am big on, very, very big on. So it will be good to get a junior on board that can help not just develop their professional career, but maybe their personal lives as well. Very similar to the stuff that we talk about on this pod. Yeah, bit of a nurturer I am. Can't help but take people under my wing. The reason for that is quite simply, I wish I had more of that when I was a kid. A lot of capabilities, didn't really fully recognize for what I was capable of. Had to prove it to myself, I had to prove it to others, and it wasn't really healthily displayed when I did do it. It came off as arrogant, and sometimes what would happen is I would shrink myself down because sometimes I would be way smarter than a lot of other kids in school, and I would sit there bored, and the other kids wouldn't take well to that because they just saw me as this brash and arrogant little kid that was getting everything done way before them, and it made me a bit of a target. So there was a particular time in my life where I hid away from my capabilities and what I thought I could do for myself and for others. But as part of my ongoing evolution, and particularly that I'm creating something that is uniquely mine for me, I'm going to let it shine, baby. I'm going to keep pushing myself and keep taking myself as far as I can go and not let the opinions of others get in my way about how they perceive me because they're not me. And why should I hide it? I don't encourage anyone else to hide who they are. So make space, motherfuckers. All right, that's enough about me for now. What are we talking about? We're talking about cognition. We're going through part 3 of this perceptive process and breaking it down. Yes, it's exciting stuff. It's I wonder if I'll come back to this at some point later on and piece it apart and rejig it and rebuild it. Because I will say one of the things that I've felt throughout creating this podcast is how rambly I can get. And I talked about this before, but I like to be succinct. I don't mind talking. Sure, I can fucking talk. But, this is a lot of theories that I've had bubbling in my head. And generally, I find the first time around when I'm explaining these concepts or just explaining concepts in general, I'm not necessarily the most precise about where I can put this. So maybe I'll come back to this and maybe be a different, shorter form. Maybe I'll cut these down little TikToks. Who knows? But definitely been a lot of fun. And thank you for hanging around for this. It's been exciting. But not to say that this is the end of it. I'll definitely be exploring a lot more little tips and tricks. I've still got plenty of episodes in mind, but I do want to get more guests on. I've had a couple of people reach out, which is very nice. Hey, again, open invitation. You want to have an interesting conversation about yourself, getting better, anything that you see or hear in the world that you want to explore. I'm open to it. Reach out. But cognition, belief. What do our brains do? So to take a bit of a backward step, let's go through the previous processes. So number one, it's about attention. Where you place your attention creates the frame and the context of your experience. So being very diligent with your attention is one of the most crucial points to redefining your perceptions of yourself and the world and being able to reprogram them to your best benefit. So attention is number one. Number two, or phase two, is information. So where the scope of your attention defines the bandwidth and the breadth of the information that you receive. So being very selective about that information, making sure it benefits you, making sure that it uplifts you and serves you as opposed to draining you is very important for your long-term physical and mental health and general well-being. But part three is cognition. What is your brain doing with this information? Because it's not just coming into your mind raw. Well, it is coming in raw, actually. But you already have preconceptions because your brain is constantly learning and updating. Or at least you'd hope so anyway. So understanding what your brain is going to do with this information through your belief systems and what you know to be true so far and preconceived notions of what the world is like will heavily govern this information and how you respond to it, and then in so forth create your perception of the world or whatever you are perceiving outwardly at that time, or even inwardly. Significant levels of both. So in the outside world, right now, particularly with what's going on, well, it's not really just the outside world, actually. It's both. I don't think there's really inner and outer. There's definitely some inner stuff that we'll talk about, but I actually did have a bit of trouble defining this in the outside world. But let's just talk about belief. Belief is the key perspective on this, both internally and externally. The belief part is probably the majority of the concept of cognition. What do you believe to be correct? And what does the information that you are provided do to serve that perception, that belief system? Does it reinforce it? Does it challenge it? You know, belief is fraught amongst many of us for different reasons and not necessarily correct all the time. Most of our belief systems just come from the cognition that came before it. The belief systems and the outcomes that shaped your experience to develop it, to create fear, to create lessons, to create feedback. All of these generate your belief systems. A lot of our belief systems come from our parents and our immediate environment and society, and personal experience, constantly changing and evolving, or at least you hope so anyway. I think there was some study, I don't know how accurate this is, but I'll throw it out there anyway. I think it's by about 35 years old, you start to finalize and crystallize your belief systems about the world. And it's much harder to change those perspectives as you age. Now, that's for the regular person, I would presume. Very similar to how our brains stop maturing at 25-ish. But still, now that we talked about neuroplasticity and the concepts around that, there are plenty of tools that are in place to keep changing and modulating your brain and your belief systems and your neural networks through conscious and involved learning to help improve you as an individual. I mean, I'm 31 and I am constantly learning. I've learned plenty of new things over the last 8 months, kept a lot of it, but also knowing that I'm throwing a lot of historical information out in the back somewhere as well. That's what I presume. I could be wrong. Maybe it just sits deep in the subconscious, deep in the freezer box of our brains, and might come out when I get dementia one day. Who knows? But belief and what we believe to be true, what our cognition drives us to drive and push towards, is basically one of the most widespread conflict points in our society. Right? All of these different perspectives of what we believe, religion, sexuality, gender, all of those things that we quarrel about on social media. All of those are just blurtings of our belief systems, of ideas and preconceived notions of how the world should be and how we should be as individuals and as a collective. I mean, it's immensely powerful. These beliefs, these ideas have shaped our world and our collective consciousness since the dawn of time. I mean, let's just take the burning elephant in the room right now, Russia and Ukraine, right? That's two different belief systems in conflict, and certainly a belief system of powerful people that is being impinged on the people of Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying I'm necessarily pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. I understand, if I had to, throw my dumb 2 cents in on this, I understand why Russia is on the back foot when you consider all of the advances of NATO, despite the pledges during the collapse of the USSR to provide security and for NATO not to come up to Russia's borders and have strategic military surrounding their borders. And Ukraine's one of the last countries that isn't part of NATO. So you can understand why they would target Ukraine, but the ideas around reclaiming Russian imperialism is not the answer to their defensive perspective on what's happening in the world. I mean, if you're using NATO as the potential excuse, but they're not even really doing that. Putin's talking about the good old days when all the Slavic countries and all the bloody Eastern European countries used to be part of bloody the Rus and, the ancient Russian empires of hundreds of years ago. So he's trying to, replenish and restore his old monarchy that he wasn't even really a part of? Seems ridiculous. But war is not the answer to this. And it does make you wonder what the ulterior motive is. Because it sounds like a lot of bullshit. And I can't really imagine the oligarchs backing this feigned nationalistic stance to invade Ukraine. But hey, I mean, they haven't necessarily been the most effective military strategists in the last couple of 100 years. They lost their empire. A very cold winter worked in their favor in World War II. They've had numerous little tussles with Japan and Afghanistan, and I think it was Finland, and it really has not worked at all. Maybe this is just another of those. Maybe they're just so bitterly cold they just want to go somewhere a little bit warmer. Who fucking knows? But it just goes to show how powerful belief is that Putin is impinging his beliefs and can mobilize an army of thousands and hundreds of thousands and somehow summon the will of definitely not the people, but at least the ruling class that have the resources to facilitate his agenda. And one of the things I'm very interested to know actually is, and I haven't checked, but what's the question? Oh yeah, what's the sentiment in Russia? What are the polls saying about this invasion? And I know that would probably be a very would be a very inconclusive, or probably not inconclusive, incomplete sort of data set, because where are the central and unbiased perspectives in Russian media? I don't know. Maybe there is some, I don't know. But there's propaganda on both sides. One of the interesting things about the last couple of weeks since this conflict has started is the amount of fake news and fake stories that are going around that are pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia. You just know that Russia is using some sort of propaganda to fuel their soldiers and to win the hearts and minds of the people that would support what's going on. So, I think this is a pretty common thing that's going around at the moment, is the first casualty of war is the truth. Because you've got to be able to use propaganda and incite a belief system in the people that are fighting for you to willing to put their lives at risk for this belief. And it very much seems that if you were to look at this from a belief perspective, the belief perspective of Ukrainians defending their homeland is a much more stronger and noble belief system than Russia invading for the sake of restoring the old days. And I can't imagine that there are many soldiers, unless they are quite nationalistic, that would be in support of this move. And that's one of the perspectives of why we support our armies for going into wars that we don't necessarily approve of, and we need to blame the leaders that mobilize these troops and send them into wars and conflicts to fight for preconceived beliefs of what we think is correct, right? Like the post-war sentiment from Vietnam. Yeah, we shouldn't have been there in the first place, but you can't blame the soldiers for that. You can and you can't. It's difficult, but I would say you can't blame the soldiers. They have had their pride, their nationalistic pride, in a positive nationalistic perspective, taken advantage of by the power brokers that want to serve the agenda of their interest. I mean, you look at the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Well, Iraq in particular. Afghanistan, okay, some sort of retaliation, but not really. The majority of the 9/11 terrorists were Saudis. He just went to Afghanistan because Osama was chilling in a cliff somewhere, sending out fucking mixtapes all day. But Iraq was pointless. It was really pointless. No weapons of mass destruction, nothing to do with anything that happened relative to 9/11. And you've sent people in there time and time again to find the weapons of mass destruction, weren't there. Okay, now we're peacekeeping. Peace didn't work. Oh, we're going to rebuild the nation. Man, they're fucked. Went into ISIS. But somehow the belief from the powers that be keeps pushing resources, people into these places because of what they believe, or at least they pertain to believe. Who knows if they genuinely believe it? It's sad, man. It's fucking sad. That's the biggest thing. It's just sad. Sad that force is being used as an answer. And I think that needs to be focused on, just to focus on the sadness and not the anger. Because, I mean, it's fair to say, but like, there are people that are like, well, you know, so it's so easy to be sad for Ukraine, but have we forgotten about the Afghans? What about the millions of people that have died in Afghanistan and Iraq? There weren't this level of sentiment back in the day. God damn it, I'm 3 for 3 on contacts coming out of my eye during a show. And we're back. But yeah, we seem to have this habit of going, oh, we shouldn't feel as bad for the Ukrainians because there are other people suffering too, the Yemenis, all of the conflicts that we have around the world. I mean, sure, but doesn't mean we can't have empathy for both. Instead of bickering about who should we feel more sorry for, just feel bad for the situation and do what we can to prevent it. So maybe let's go back to cognition, right? We've talked about belief. We've talked about how that drives how we operate with the information that we've received to date and the attention that we've placed in these different perspectives. One of the things that I keep noticing as I have, spent more time away from people or gone through this process of change and transformation and sort of broadening my own perspective is we're getting closer to the singularity. And if you don't know what the singularity is, it's the convergence of technology and humanity into some potential superorganism. Maybe not. Maybe we get erased because we are the error in the precision of technology. Who knows? But as we approach this singularity, I'm noticing that we are becoming more and more like the technology we create. Or is it the other way around? Who knows? Have we created technology in our own image, just imagined the way we would want ourselves to be? Efficient, precise. We design things now increasingly with more perfection, less error. Who knows? But I don't know if it's been just sitting away from people or just noticing the patterns because I spend a lot of time around technology and getting deeper involved with that and spending a lot more time with people. The closer that we converge towards a singularity is that I see people becoming more robotic. I tend to notice the cognitive patterns and the programming and the scripts that occur in people's minds. And it's increasingly difficult for me to not see people as pieces of technology. And how I break this down is like, so our cognition is a lot like the operating system of our minds. So if you think about people, maybe your parents, they're still operating on Windows 95. People, like good people that listen to this podcast, they're on Windows 11, maybe. Maybe they're probably Mac people, let's be honest. But they're running on the latest, cleanest version, up to date, well thought out, willing to upgrade and change their perspectives for a more positive worldview. And then you've got people that are still running on old 286 computers and 8-bit fucking floppy drives. And that's most of the people that we have in government. And then all of our skills and our knowledge that we have individually are like the apps and programs that we've installed into ourselves, right? It is getting increasingly matrixy. Sort of like when Neo gets to just upload kung fu into his brain. Maybe we'll get to that point as we understand how to integrate technology in the uplink of data from the digital world into our organic flesh and create neural networks and pathways that can program and synchronize all the different neural pathways to make us kick and punch and say, "Wata!" and all that cool stuff. I wonder if they would program you saying "Wata" in like Kung Fu in the Matrix. That's a good question. And is that vaguely racist? Because if you're Keanu Reeves and you're going, "Wata!" you could, "Wata!" something like that. But you can't help it. I can't help but see it. I can't help but see people running their scripts over and over again, running their programs over and over again. It's the same old repetitive bullshit sometimes. You can just see the little pinwheel in their brains as they go about their day and this new piece of information hits them. You can watch the hamster wheel spin in their mind. How does this operate within their belief system? What do they do with this information? And how do they respond to it? And sometimes it's almost predictable, which is interesting, maybe a little bit sad. But having that perspective on people, it goes two ways. It goes, well, maybe we are as predictable as marketing and advertising makes us out to be, because they seem to be extremely efficient at getting resources out of us by manipulating our attention, our information, and our cognitive beliefs by changing them to suit their agenda. And that dark art of persuasion and changing perception to make a purchase decision is exactly that. It's a dark art, actually. You don't want to think that you are so easily fooled and tricked into being manipulated into buying something or just doing something, but we are. We simply are. It happens to us all the time. We're highly irrational about our purchasing decisions. We're highly irrational about the way we respond to certain situations. And a well-disciplined and a well-refined mind is much more rational and is a lot more pliable and flexible to the environment it's in, as opposed to just being reactive and becoming a victim to it. So, seeing that, it reinforces the idea that technology has already outperformed us as a species, right? Because if you think about all the wonders that occur with technology and what they've brought us in the last 20 years, and every single advance in technology, in a form of media, and a form of just progress, we use it to immediately self-gratify and soothe that monkey mind of ours, the social indulgent mind. I mean, the number one example of that is porn on the internet. Pornography is the earliest adopter to most progression in technology. When the internet came up, porn. When VR started becoming a thing, porn. When DVDs came out, fucking porn DVDs. Everything, our immediate reaction to things when we progress into a better form of consciousness and a better form of reality, our first instinct is to go, make us feel good. Which is just funny to me. It's kind of hilarious. And it just makes me think that despite all these advances in technology, it's only going to be as effective as the minds that are using it to their benefit, to their detriment, usually to our detriment. Look at social media. The moment you gave everyone a voice, you didn't want to listen to them because the shit they have to say is fucking dumb. Just like I said, the VR glasses, you don't want to think about what people are doing with those VR glasses in their privacy of their own home. And that's why I think the metaverse is going to fail, actually. I think the metaverse is not going to go the way we expect it to be. It's going to have certain benefits in immersive experiences like gaming, but for the general population, it's just not going to work because it's inconvenient and it's going to become toxic because it's going to be another form of escapism from the reality of what's going on in the now. And if people are escaping their lives to go into the digital world, then they're going to take the toxic behaviors that they're trying to avoid with them into that metaverse and fuck shit up over there. I mean, one of the most prominent things we're hearing about with the metaverse being opened up now is that women are getting sexually assaulted in the metaverse. All right? The shadow parts of ourselves seem to be the ones that project us into these new dimensions because we're trying to escape them, but we take them with us because we don't face them. And that all to me that says is that, again, the monkey mind is where we are predominantly at. And the conscious mind and evolving that is part of our mission as a species to keep developing that frontal lobe, that more rational brain of ours that allows us to make more cognitive and conscious decisions of our well-being, as opposed to, being that fucking monkey that puts his finger up its ass and smells it and passes out. That was, again, fucking hilarious, but still, you can see a bit of yourself in there. We've all done it. So we are just like, was it 2000 A Space Odyssey? We are still those chimps, and that bone that they start smashing things with, that's the metaverse. That's IoT. That's fourth industrial revolution for the most part, right? But no matter what the tool that is put in front of us, if we are not evolving the mind behind it to use it most effectively for our own benefit, we're not going to progress anywhere as far as we think we are going to. That's one of the greatest perspectives, is just understanding that we are not as smart as we think. We like to think we are, but you look at our actions versus the thoughts we have about how complicated and complex we are. Sometimes we can be boiled down to a demographic and be sold to. So what can we do about our cognition? How can we work it, manipulate it, reconstruct it, all that good stuff to our benefit? Well, some of the tools that I've used most effectively to reprogram my subconscious mind and my cognitive beliefs have been processing a lot of the emotions and the bullshit that I've had, number one, because a lot of our cognitive beliefs created by the ego have been formulated to protect us from wounds that we have not fully processed. And we'll talk about trauma a little bit later on, because it's a massive perspective shift once you understand what that is. So how I do that is by breaking emotional states when I feel like I'm getting caught up in an emotion, particularly when false narratives of worrying and bullshit enter my mind. So once I catch myself, if I'm spiraling or just getting down a rabbit hole of bullshit, being able to catch myself, shake off the emotional state so I'm not feeding those distress signals consciously into my brain by dwelling on these things and putting my body somatically into fight or flight mode when I'm worried about things that I don't need to be. Journaling has been another big thing for me. I think that's an important part to reprogramming the subconscious mind, because that's what we're leading to do here. Is a lot of the information, particularly the cognition manipulation, is really about reprogramming our subconscious beliefs by putting a light on them, by being observant of our everyday lives and self-reflection on our emotions and our motives and the things that we do, and B, programming and reprogramming those perceptions and accessing that subconscious mind through a range of practices so we can, just recircuit things. That's one of the underlying themes about this podcast and this series is that, just like a big old telephone switch, or when you're fucking putting in a stereo, you just got to rewire a bunch of cables on a bunch of neural networks in your brain and put them in the right order and orchestrate them towards outcomes that you want. So how journaling has done that for me has been through reinforcing positive perspectives in my day, particularly at the start, at the end of my day. I do so because you're more likely to access your subconscious state at first thing in the morning and before you go to bed at night, because cognitively that is the thing that sits in the front of your mind and then get absorbed into your subconscious before you go to bed. When you access your deeper theta waves and delta waves. Is it delta waves? Yeah, delta or theta waves, which are the lower frequency brain waves that basically activate within the somatic or the subconscious. I'm getting too neurological here. Basically, you've got your beta waves, which is, your higher frequency waves are more distressed. Your alpha waves, which is your general calm cognitive perspective and where your brain operates as a brain frequency. And then you've also got, I think it's delta or theta, but that's like that's the guts. That's the, pulling up the engine bay of your brain, getting into those waves. So when you're in that frequency, the information that you receive there is generally accessing your subconscious. And that's when you really get into, think of it like opening the bonnet of your car and tinkering around in there in the machine bay, or in the engine bay, sorry. So you have the most access to those lower frequency brain waves in the subconscious of your mind first thing in the morning when you wake up, and then you access them with good quality sleep before you go to bed every night. So I journal first thing in the morning and then last thing at night. So what I journal about, I've been doing it for the last year and a bit. It's been good. It's been a great habit of mine. And what I use the journal for is to reinforce positivity through gratitude, reflection, and just good things in my life, and training my brain to think positively as often as I can. So I break it up into two parts, the journaling. So the first thing I do is I write down any dreams that I had. So just if I remember them, because sometimes dreams are a part of the subconscious. You may be able to articulate or sort of reflect in those bits and pieces and see if there's anything in there that sort of relates to whatever you're going through at the moment. What did I dream about today? Oh, man, today I had this fucked dream where I was in Antarctica and I had shit myself. And I shit myself really badly, so much that it would leak on the ground. And I was like in a public place in Antarctica, like maybe some sort of base, but it was not really a base. It was almost like a function hall of some sort. Anyway, I was just like, I've been caught out shitting myself here. And I was trying to rub it into the carpet. Didn't really work. Whoever was managing that place saw me. And they're like, oh, fuck, we'll have to clean this up. And I'm like, my bad. And then for some reason, the cleanup bill for my shit in Antarctica was $20,000. And I was like, fuck. Fair enough, right? I mean, shipping a new carpet to Antarctica is definitely not cheap. So, yeah, fair enough. Thank God that wasn't real. And also, sometimes, you shouldn't, like, if you've got to pee or piss, piss or pee. Sorry. If you need to piss or poop in your dreams, it's sometimes a signal for you to, that you need to piss or poop in real life. And you're like, And I've been there, right? Sometimes you feel like you got to piss in your dream, and then you actually take the piss and then you piss yourself, right? It's been a very long time since that's happened, but I definitely have the cognition in my brain now, even when I'm dreaming, to go, hey, if you've got to pee in this dream, do not pee. Wake the fuck up, go to the toilet. And then I usually wake up with this distended lower stomach full of urine, and I have to go take a piss. I don't even know where I was going with that, but I just thought that was funny to reflect on. But yeah, sorry, dreams. So write down my dream. If I can't remember, I can't remember. And then what I do is I write down 3 things that I am grateful for. So I have a bit of a reflection. Maybe something great happened yesterday. Maybe I'm just feeling good about what's happening in life. Sometimes one of the things I was grateful for today or yesterday was just being in a safe place despite all of the shit that's going on in the world. It can be something as simple as that. So 3 things that I'm grateful for. And you need to feel the gratitude. Gratitude is a practice I think is extremely powerful. But it's not enough to just write it down and be like, oh, yes, this is good. It is genuinely about feeling gratitude in your heart, feeling that warmth that you get when you are grateful for life and channeling that. And sometimes it's difficult, right? But what I like to do is I like to anchor myself to emotional states where I have felt genuine gratitude for someone or something in my life, and just remembering that, because it's easy to just write something fucking airy-fairy down, but to genuinely realign your emotional and cognitive state, to reprogram your subconscious mind towards things that are positive and to be grateful for things, you need to align the emotion and the thought in your own body. So that's an important thing, is to actually feel the gratitude when you writing it down. I do a little gratitude / prayer when I finish journaling, but we'll get to that in a sec. So yeah, 3 things that I'm grateful for. 3 things that are the 1% that I can focus on for the day. Right? What I literally write down, what 1% can I focus on today? And I write down 3 tasks that I need to do, that if I tick them off, I know I've had a great day. I know I've had a step in the right direction. And they can be anything. It can be work-related. It can be personally related. It can be, sometimes it is, knock out this fucking podcast and I'll feel good that I've done it. And that's the thing, is that, again, you should not be thinking about broad, sweeping, fucking grand gestures to make your life better. It is about incremental steps that you do every day consistently. And so being able to tick those 3 things off, and when you do, write down at the end of the day, great day. You've had a fucking great day. So I do that. And then that gives me that minor focus that's broken down into a level that's digestible and it feels achievable as well. Because if you make your grand design and grand tasks too big, they seem insurmountable. It gives you less confidence to achieve them. So again, the 1% is every fucking day. Focus on that. And then what I'll do is I write down 3 emotions, 3 feeling tones that I can feel within my body at that point in time. Because we're not just a singular emotion. Once you get better at mindfulness, you notice, various feeling tones. Maybe you're a bit tired. Maybe you're a bit despondent. Maybe you're just groggy. Maybe you've had a stressful time the last few days and you're a bit drained. Spell it out. Talk about it. Expunge it from you. Is expunge the right word? I don't know. But get it out of your system. Write it down. It doesn't have to be negative either. It could be positive. What did I put down? I think I put down today, I was tired, but positive and proud. Because I've really been proud about the progress and the work that I've been doing with building out ACN. It's been really positive. So it can be good and bad. Right? And that's the first half of the day. Then I sit for a second, genuinely feel that gratitude, align myself spiritually and cognitively to those emotion states and those feeling states. Feel that gratitude. I do a bit of a prayer to the great powers and the great spirits beyond what I believe in. It's not a God. It is a God, but it's not a particular God. It's just that great connecting power that feeds through us all. And that's how I start my day. And I do that usually within the first 15, 20 minutes of a day. So nice and early. One of the first things that I do takes me a couple of minutes, but it puts me in an emotional and cognitive state towards positivity. At the end of the evening, one of the last things I do before I go to bed, I take my supplements, take a whole bunch of different supplements, magnesium, zinc, cod liver oil. That's all for good male sexual health function and to increase my testosterone naturally, which has been great. And then at the end of the day, I reflect. Did I achieve the 3 things that I did that day? Tick, tick, tick. Maybe not a big deal. But if I tick, 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 great day. Write it down, feel good. What then I also do is I write down something great that happened today. I literally write that down and I think about all the good things that have happened in my day. Right? And it can be small. It can be the smallest win. Doesn't matter. Yesterday, what did I have? I helped my great aunt. I've been helping my great aunt use her first mobile phone. I got her a flip phone for Christmas. I've been teaching her slowly how to use her mobile, and she's loved it. I've taught her well. She's a great learner. She uses her mobile way better than my mum and any of my aunties, for fuck's sake, and they're about 20 years older or 30 years older than her or younger than her, and she's killing it. She knows how to recharge. She's calling overseas. She's saving money because she's not using a landline. And, I had a really great conversation with her. She was genuinely joyful to be enjoying technology and be connected with her family back home. And it was great. That's one of the things I ticked off. Just those little bits and pieces that are in my life that I can condition my mind to seek positivity in. Right? So what's something great about what's happened today? And then what I also do is, today I've learnt. I write that down. If I had to take away something from what's happened today, what is it? What is the lesson that I have learnt today? And I just write that down. It can be, made a bit of a mistake again here. Don't fall back into bad habits. It can be, hey, I think yesterday I put the gratitude I have for having this week off from starting work and having the rest and the space to launch and debrief from all the work that I've done over the last few days. So that's also been, that's a positive takeaway. And then I think what I also used to do when I was sort of starting this process, and I recommend it to people who are just starting to journal and who are also trying to help define what gives them purpose and what energizes them to help find that purposeful activity or perspective in their lives, is to write down, I felt most empowered when. When in your day did you feel the most energized, the most purposeful, the most positive? What are the moments and the emotional highlights in your day, and what were you doing? Because if you can put those pieces together over time, that can give you some patterns as to the things that you should be focusing on in your life if things are negative, or if you're feeling despondent and you don't feel like you know what you're doing with yourself. Being able to put attention on these things, source that information, utilize that cognition to go, hey, I recognize a pattern here. I should aim in this direction. That shit compounds over time. So again, highly recommend what lit me up today. When did I feel the most empowered? What can I do, or what did I do that energized me, right? Because the things that you realize that I feel like I'm blessed with purposeful work and what I'm doing now. And one of the things I like to say the most is passion is free energy, right? I run 3 gigs. I'm going to go back to work full time. I'm launching a company. I've got this podcast. I still got to make time for friends and family. I do a fucking lot. But I have the energy to do it because I'm passionate about it and I love what I do. So passion is free energy. So if you can leverage your perspective, pay attention, right, and receive the information of what you enjoy, you'll cognitively believe that and build that belief and aim towards it, and you will be rewarded through that process. That's exactly what happened to me to get to this point in time. So that's a great way to reprogram your subconscious as a daily practice that's a little bit more regimented. So, how can we reprogram and rework our inner worlds, our minds, our conscious minds, the thoughts and the actions that govern our everyday? The biggest change for me was my internal monologue and changing that, and being able to redefine the stories that exist in my head, the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves. Because we're telling ourselves stories about ourselves and about the world all the time. Those are our cognitive beliefs. We think in stories. So if you have a negative perspective about something, you're telling yourself a story about why that is wrong for you. If you don't believe in yourself, you're telling yourself the story of why you are wrong. And it's almost insane the amount of times you tell yourself these things, but don't pay attention to the fact that you're actually doing it. And if someone outside of you was telling you the negativity that you said in your own mind, you'd fucking punch him in the face. And that's one of the crazy things is that, I have a very, very harsh inner critic. And I still do, but I used to have a really harsh one. And I can take criticism from others because the worst critic is me, right? No one is a better critic of myself than me. But that's gotten a lot better over time, again, through reprogramming these subconscious perspectives, not focusing on the negatives, training my brain consciously to focus on the positives by improving my physical state so my body isn't full of cortisol and stress hormones, and, it is working efficiently physically. And then reprogramming it through these active practices, mindfulness, meditation, right? Being able to pay attention to the noise in my mind and being able to pay attention to it and then work on changing it. And then reprogramming it through breaking emotional states of negative bullshit, actively training my brain and building habits to look positively, realigning my emotional state to think positively and to be grateful for the outside world through gratitude, as opposed to thinking that everyone's against me, because that's a scarcity mindset. And that is the ego doing its job of trying to protect you from the outside world by throwing out false narratives about the negativity of the world. Because that's what it does. That's the cognition. A lot of the ego is your cognition learning from the outside world, times that you were hurt, times you were traumatized, and then learning that that is bad. And depending on the severity of how bad that was for you, putting a lot in between it, right? And then one of the crazier things that I've found through this process is that the more you've been traumatized by something and the more you've been affected by it, the louder the resistance is in your mind to work towards it and to work through it. Because again, the ego is like, that really fucking sucked when you were a kid. So let's put every mental stopgap that we can between you and that wound, even though it's seething open, and the best way to actually heal that is to consciously work through that emotion and close that up. No, that's where one of the biggest downsides of the ego is that by creating that barrier between you and the wound that needs to be healed and be processed, it keeps you in the negative narratives that probably create the negative habits that you have in your life every single day. So I think this is a good segue into what is that inside world? What is that cognition? I've talked about trauma. Trauma and understanding trauma has been one of the greatest, and I cannot understate this, greatest shifts in perspective about how we operate cognitively, both personally and interpersonally and at the world at large. Trauma has taught me that we are just a massive shitload of hurt children, because a lot of the traumas that we face in our lives come from parental and developmental trauma, where when our worlds are so small and we are still so fragile mentally and so impressionable mentally as children, something that we have not appreciated until even the last 15, 20 years probably, our brains revert and our minds revert to those states of harm when they come back to us in various triggers as we get older. So when you think about the worst of someone, when they're in those triggered states or those insane states, or you've got a Karen somewhere in your life, that is a wounded child yelling at you, not a middle-aged, bowl haircut with a colored fringe being her best individual self. And so much of the trauma that we have in our lives is developmental. It comes from our parents. It comes from the environment that we're raised in. A lot of it's intergenerational, habits and different, generations of habits that have been passed down from generation to generation of bullshit, a lot of survival instinct as opposed to the thriving mentality that we strive for in our everyday lives. And this transition of understanding your trauma and how it affects us as people will radically shift how you think about yourself and how you think about the world at large. And based on this, so let me talk about the why of that. So one of the biggest shifts for me when it came to understanding who we are, who I am, why I am, is this trauma aspect. There was this great movie that I saw by he's a neuroscientist or a therapist. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. And he spent 30 years studying addiction and the nature of addiction. And he found that one of the causes of addiction is to soothe the wounds and to create security around deep pain and insecurity that we felt as children. That's why a significant amount of people that would abuse as children, traumatized for various reasons, a poor family environment, terrible developmental environment. That's why they end up being drug addicts, because they did not receive the emotional security that they needed as children, which left gaping open wounds. And because they weren't provided with the tools to reflect and process and heal from that, and that pain never went away, and they just kept focusing on it and kept picking at it without actually solving the problem, their addictions got worse and worse. And that's how you have people that are, cracked out on the streets, and people that are, doing extreme things just to get that hit, because that's how much the ante has to be increased to numb the pain that they don't know how to heal within themselves. And that's a very interesting perspective when it comes to trauma. And to come from a very compassionate, non-judgmental way about the nature of those people. Is that because, even particularly now, how long have we focused on mental health and what that actually means for us? I mean, it's only become real popular in the last 2 years into the collective of the now. Therapy was not necessarily, was a fringe activity for people, had a lot of stigma attached to it, and it still has a lot of toxicity associated around it unfairly for no good reason. And again, the ego comes into play, wants to defend itself from actually potentially healing whatever is inside. And one of the greatest perspectives in this mental health revolution is to observe. That's one of the key things about mental health, is to just observe emotion, not judge it. And I talked about it in the previous ep. Judging an emotion or having a judgment of yourself removes the opportunity to observe it and retrace its source, because there are breadcrumbs and there is a paper trail for almost everything that we feel. Yes, emotions can just come and go as clouds, but the recurring ones, the things that keep you up at night, the continual negative habits that you find yourself in, the things you keep asking yourself about, why the fuck do I do this, is often linked to something traumatic, and it puts you in that cognitive loop of doing that same shit over and over again, because that's the only way your brain knows how to deal with it. But one of the most fundamental shifts in perspective as a result of understanding what trauma means is that we all have this trauma. We all know we do. And the perspective changes when you look at an individual to go from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. What didn't you get when you were a child that has led you down this pathway of abuse, whether it be drug, alcohol, sex, whatever we use to placate ourselves from the present moment. And by going what's wrong to what happened, there is a shift in non-judgment to observation. What happened here? What's going on? Let me collect the information of who you are and what's happened here, and then I'll formulate an outcome or a judgment. And by removing this layer of judgment from your perspective, it creates a lot of room for empathy and understanding and relatability. Because once you understand that we've all had this problem, and these problems that we've been encoded into, these preconceived cognitive beliefs have been put into our minds before we had the conscious ability to control it or be even aware of it, you go, man, it's not your fault. It's not your fault you're like this. You didn't know any better. You weren't given the tools. You weren't educated on how to manage this perspective and this situation to your best benefit. And then you expand that perspective out to everyone, because we've all got it, because the environment that we have been developed in hasn't been to our best benefit. Right? Most of our traumas come from our developmental phases, from our parents who've received their bullshit from their parents, who raised us in single unit families as opposed to the more tribal families we're used to. So we're very much imprinted the negative behaviors and perspectives of our parents into us. And then there's all the other things that happen socially to us that our parents don't tell us how to regulate the emotions of and our reactions to. And without that supervision, that just sticks in our brains. Right? Well, that's that trauma now, right? You know, I'm going to be scared of heights now, which I am. This is an example, right? The irrational fears that you have came from something. And if no one was there to rationalize that for you, that's going to sit there until you rationalize it for yourself. So understanding that we are all traumatized in our own ways, particularly as I mature, I have gone through a perspective now that, I've understood that my parents definitely aren't perfect, and they did the best they could with the situation they had, but they are definitely flawed individuals who did not have a lot of emotional guidance and a lot of emotional self-regulation taught to them, because they came from gigantic ethnic families. My dad is one of 9. My mum is one of 11. They were in survival mode. They didn't understand these tools around mental health and emotional self-regulation. They were entirely defined by the ego. That voice that we all have in our heads that, for better or for worse, governs our perspective in the world. And that's what happens. So many of us are identified with our ego at any one time, thinking that it's our ally. And it can be when you understand how it's supposed to work. But when you recognize that the ego will, in deep truth, hinder your ability to make progress if you do not understand the protective nature of what it set out to do, then you're going to be stuck in the loops that it reinforces in your mind constantly. And that's why one of my mantras is, everything you want is outside your comfort zone. Everything you want is outside your comfort zone, because you have to probably fight the ego, awkwardness, pain, insecurity to get to those points. And it most likely is the ego, particularly if you're trying to come back to something that you failed at, or if you're trying to address a preconceived fear that you've got. Your ego is making you uncomfortable to get to that point because it's going, oh, fuck, you were hurt by that last time. Don't go back there. No, it's bad for you. No, it's bad for you. Particularly when you get closer to it and you are cognitively and consciously rewiring those habits towards your benefit, you're fighting yourself to get to that point. And that point came from something traumatic. So by understanding that nature and how it exists in our family units and in the environments that are close to us that shape our realities, it probably informs a lot of the bullshit that you've suffered in your life and the continual negative habits that you've got that cause you to suffer every single day. And in fact, with that understanding, my theory now, people talk about nature versus nurture. What is it? Is it more nature or is it more nurture? Based on my understanding at this point, I believe that I think that it's nurture that does most of the work for us and affects us the most. Because I think that when we are born, when we're babies, we are born pure, blank, empty slate. The only thing that we have been predetermined in our existences is the genetic coding of our parents and our biology. But everything that we have learned or can learn, for the most part, not that I'm saying 100% correct on this, is all a result of the environment that we are in and how that affects us in our realities. So if you are constantly shaped by the nurturing or the lack thereof, that's what's going to create the gaps in our cognitive lives, in the things that we need emotionally and physically, and in how it shapes our belief systems. Because when we are young, particularly in the first 7 years of our lives, we are sponges, absolute sponges of the information, because our survival instincts, our deep survival instincts, and the fact that we've got these such large brains that want to absorb information and take information in, we're learning everything. We're learning everything as much as we can. We learn the behaviors of our parents. We learn how to work things to our advantage. We learn language. We learn motor skills. We learn so much developmental stuff when we are young. But also, our worlds are so small, right? We are still cognitively linked to our senses and our limited perspective of the environment of who we are as little children. And our needs as children, whilst they might seem insignificant to our tired parents who have got to worry about bills and wiping your ass and drama at work, and they might dismiss the major problems that you feel like you're in your life and this emotional support you need, that's going to fuck you up as a kid, because it might seem insignificant to them, but in your limited world, it's huge. And having that perspective, those little things can fuck you up, right? So when you have that, that's what's going to cause little bits and bobs along the way. And that's why it's also so hard to really trace back, sometimes without maybe some deep therapy, the trail of why you do the things you do and who you are. But the habits that we create are often from the world that our parents put us into, for better or for worse. And for the 99.9% of us, we're carrying the bullshit of our parents because they definitely did not get the emotional security and understanding they needed as kids, because we haven't really understood that shit until now. And maybe the first or second generation that has that understanding potentially en masse to pass that on to our kids. So we are a lot more emotionally cognizant of their needs to make them and have developed them into more better balanced human beings. That's not to say they'll be perfect. Fuck no, there's no such thing as perfection. But it might take away the big rocks in our lives, right? So that's the nature and nurture for me, is the small worlds that we exist in as children will predetermine a lot of the big problems in our lives, and our parents and the people that are responsible for us are unaware of that. And that's what seethes and sort of sits in you for a very long time until you figure it out consciously, if you're lucky, in later life. But because you don't know any better, so much of these traumatic events in your life aren't your fault. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of the environment that you live in. And it's a pain in the ass, but it's entirely up to you to figure that shit out in your life and make it better. Or else you will replay the same cognitive bullshit loops in your life over and over again. And that's what happened to me until I changed all that shit. And I still continue to change that shit. I am constantly evolving and working on myself. But the big rocks around my own diet, believing in myself to have discipline, that I could achieve things if I wanted to, having the confidence in myself to really let myself flourish intellectually and go for the things that I want to in my life, even having the confidence to talk on this podcast and actually speak openly about this shit is the result of active reprogramming of my cognitive beliefs, changing the stories that I tell myself, and clearing all that bullshit to allow for growth and new perspectives in my life. And that is what has provided the abundance and the capability and the belief that I can do all these things at once successfully, because I have cleared the weeds and the wounds in my mind, and at least they're in the process of healing. All right? It's not a finished process, but it's there. But to go back to the whole shift in perspective of what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you, I'm increasingly obsessed with the convergence of science and nature and spirituality. All right, there's that film, The Wisdom of Trauma. Highly recommend you watch it. The Wisdom of Trauma, great movie, is produced and distributed by an organization called SAND, Science and Non-Duality. And what they mean by that is that the duality that exists between science and spirituality is actually a lot less non-existent than you think. Because a lot of the things that we are starting to notice ourselves through the attention that has been paid in the external world through science is very similar to the observations made in the spiritual world by different ancient religions, sects, belief systems in the spiritual world. So things like, Buddhism, Sufism, Taoism. Taoism, for example, already had the concept of the quantum universe 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, about understanding energy and matter and the duality of those two principles in the quantum world. And it took us until 50 years ago to figure that out scientifically. So matching up all of these discoveries, again, through the practice of attention. Science is attention to the inner world, outer world. Meditation, self-reflection, attention to the inner world. Coming up with similar results. And it's not completely there yet, but it's certainly an interesting perspective to explore about. We all talk about collective consciousness, the singularity, about all being one. there is an interconnection towards all of this. We just probably haven't discovered it yet because we're too busy being chimps. But to go back to my point, is that one of the great spiritualists of our time, and probably the 60s and 70s, Ram Dass, very spiritual individual. I don't know if this is a Buddhist teaching or not, but something that's definitely stuck with me is that you should see people as trees. And what that means is when you look at a tree, when you look at a plant, like I'm doing right now, you appreciate the tree in its totality. You appreciate the fact that its bark might be a little bit chipped. Some of the leaves might be a little bit dry. There are these imperfections that sit within it, but you appreciate it holistically for what it is. But when you look at a person or an individual, you don't do that. You pick out what's wrong with them. Could be physically, could be mentally, the way they treat you. Instead of being observant and appreciative collectively for who they are, we judge them for the anomalies that exist in them, even though we know that there's no perfection that exists. Nature, in its broader sense, is perfect. But when you look at the minor details of it, it's highly imperfect. But when you look at that tree, you go, maybe, an animal scratched that bark. Or maybe it just didn't get enough water and it's bent a particular way. Maybe a branch is twisted. Yeah, all those leaves are dry. You don't question the nature of how that's occurred. But you do that in people and the people around you. And if you can practice that transition of perspective by seeing a person as a tree, appreciating them for who they are as their whole self, as opposed to nitpicking at the little imperfections they have, even though you've got plenty of your own, it reduces a lot of the judgment in your life of the external world. It's actually a practice of acceptance of yourself, because the things that you reject in others are a reflection of the things you reject within yourself. And it creates a lot more space for that more deeper, authentic connection with others, because you see yourself in them. And you get to connect with them at that deeper level, because you go, you're part of me, as opposed to what's wrong with you. And that's something that I constantly try to practice in my everyday life. It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge because, again, the massive self-critic that I had within myself also is reflected into the outer world by me being very judgmental of other people and picky of them. So as I've learned to accept myself and appreciate myself better, I have become significantly less judgmental of other people, who they are and what they do. I just let a lot more things just be. And that's a good place to be, because those judgments are just unnecessary negative energy that you could spend on positive things in your life. So by shifting that perspective, seeing people as trees, understanding that things that have occurred in their life aren't necessarily their fault, and that the things that happen to you and who you are aren't necessarily your fault either, it's going to give you a lot more inner peace and a much calmer perspective and a much calmer bedrock and a nice, fresh perspective to reprogram yourself for the better, right? Because you're not blaming yourself. You're understanding that it's just the nature of everything and everyone. And that gives you that solid foundation and a much higher perspective to start work on yourself from. This is a chunky fucking pod, ladies and gentlemen. But I think it's been pretty useful. I think it's been pretty productive. One of the last things I want to talk about, though, is through this understanding of perception and breaking that down, what is the benefit of that? What's the main growth factor in understanding these processes and working it to your advantage? And for me, that's the concept of cultivating a fertile mind. What I mean by that is very similar to the trees. All right, it's a tree-based analogy. Is that we have within ourselves, the deepest part of ourselves, this authentic, original, centered sense of self and being. This piece that we know that wants to come out, that wants to grow, that wants to be expressed in the habits and the behaviors and all the secret little desires that we keep to ourselves every single day. Right? There is this authentic expression within that has been submerged and beat down and mediated and rationalized and traumatized down, and we keep it within ourselves in our own little private worlds, and we mire it in shame, and we, limit it with our limited beliefs and self-talk. And very similar to, growing a tree or growing a plant, you're basically killing and trying to poison the earth that this seed of who you are is in. Right? You're putting petrol in the dirt. You're covering it with a weed killer. Right? You're trying to salt the earth and burn the earth down through this negative bullshit that you permeate yourself with every single day. So that limits the belief of who you think you are, who you think you could be. And that's probably what creates all the negativity in your life, the despondence, because you're not waking up energetic, fascinated by the world, about who you could be, excited for what could come next and what could grow from this experience. You're sitting there going, well, it's another day of this. It's another day of all the bullshit that's in my life. And I'm not really sure what this life is for. And I'm not really sure about what even life is meant to be for me. And then you numb that with fucking alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, whatever your poison is. But through these practices of consciously getting better, consciously working on yourself, being able to shift that perspective of negative self-talk, getting rid of the repetitiveness of the narrative in your own mind that is negative, reprogramming these limiting beliefs, you get to cultivate the fertile mind and create an environment of which this inner you can grow in. And that's extremely important. Right? It's extremely important. And that's why you need to have self-belief in who you are and what you can do. Because it all comes from within. It comes from within your own mind. Right? A great saying by Henry Ford. What is it? Whether you believe you can do a thing or not, you are right. And that was said 120 years ago, and it rings fucking true today. Is that if you don't believe you can do it, you can't do it. You're going to doubt yourself that you can do it. And what does that mean? That doubt sits in the poison mind of your existence. And if you are living in a toxic, if your brain and your mind and your authentic self is sitting mired in this toxic environment, how is that seedling going to grow? And will it grow to its best ability? All right? Just like the tree analogy, is this when you have this idea and you take this leap of faith towards who you are and taking steps in those wrong directions, but you keep negatively getting in your own fucking way about what you think is wrong with yourself, and I do it too, I'm just saying, is that authentic seed of who you are going to grow into the powerful tree, or is it going to be that dog shit pot plant from Bunnings that dies in 6 weeks? Because you haven't given it the nurturing environment that it needs to sprout and root and give itself the nutrients that it needs to survive in the harsh outer world, right? When you start breaking that barrier of enforcing your identity and who you are into the outer world, when you go, hey, this is me. That shit's fucking harsh. It's the Wild West in the big wide world, right? Because the world is full of these egoic, hurt people that we've just talked about that are happy to tear you down and make you the problem instead of dealing with their own shit. It's full of just vicious predators, egoic masses that are just obnoxious about how they can harm you. Because you're going to get judged, and you're going to be particularly sensitive to being judged, right? Particularly in those early days when that green shoot of who you are in the outside world could just be trampled on. And that's why it's important when you try and push towards this authentic self that you have an environment that cultivates this in the outside world. People that back you, your friends and your family, people that will big you up, people that will back you and believe in who you are instead of being negative. And that's what we talk about in the last episode, making sure that the 5 best people in your life are positive so they can reinforce and help nurture and cultivate who you want to be and who you are and love you for it. To become that tree, you got to start as a sapling. That sapling started as a seed. So you have got to make sure that you are filling your mind with the resources and water and the nurturing to get that root system strong. Because when it is tested in the outer world, in the winds and the cruelty of other people and their obnoxiousness and their survivability and their egoic bullshit, you're going to need that strong, centered sense of self to weather the storms. So if your mind is plagued and you still have those little bits of self-doubt, negative self-talk, those roots aren't necessarily going to be as strong. And you might turn out a little bit bent and twisted. But that, you know what? That's fucking fine. You're going to have the scars. You're going to be just like the trees that you appreciate around you, with a few nicks, a few wilted leaves, a few twisted branches, but you're out there. You're fucking out there. And that is infinitely better than the people around you that have fallow, empty ground within themselves because they have killed the seed within with the bullshit in their lives. And that's what's so important about understanding these processes, about how it's your responsibility to pay attention to yourself, get the right information in, be cognitive about the things that limit you, and reprogramming and updating your fucking software. Getting the latest apps and updates, right? Be a performance machine. Because you're going to need it if you're going to take life fucking seriously and not live like common people do. And when you look around, just be part of the system. Guys, I think that's the show. Done a lot of talking here. You know what? I think I've probably been the most most well-spoken that I have so far. I got to say, particularly putting myself out there the last few weeks and now rising to the occasion of having to be a leader in my own space by running this company and starting this company and being the front of it, certainly just making me stand the fuck up the way that I think I should be and be a little bit more succinct and a little bit more direct. I think I was shying away from that a little bit in the past. But again, with time, with progress, you're going to see a much more assertive, hopefully succinct individual. And hey, I hope through this process, I make you a better person. And you get a little bit sharper, a little bit better. And you aim a little bit higher towards whatever the fuck you're doing. And if you do, fucking great. Awesome. Let's keep encouraging each other. Let's keep it positive. Life does not have to be a zero-sum game. There is abundance everywhere. But it's up to you to pay attention to it, receive that information, and believe that it is for you. Next week, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to talk about. Oh, actually, no, I do. I'm going to talk a bit more about trauma, but in the self-talk piece. There is a little bit more to that because that was a big part of my life that I've had to work on to get to the point where I am. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Hopefully I'm going to get a few more guests in. I've realized that talking to people is way easier than having to think of plenty of things to talk individually. And, you know, I'm a talker, but it's good to bounce off other people. I'm going to get a few more guests in, talk about their processes, talk about what makes them tick, just shoot some shit. See where the conversation takes us. That's usually the best ones. We just let it meander on and just find good conversations and have the time to think about it properly. Before I roll off here, a couple of plugs, nothing different. Now that Aussie Comedy Network has kicked off, I would love for you to follow it. Get sharing posts. So Aussie Comedy Network on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Please follow us on all of those platforms. Share posts that you love. If you've got any great bits that you really like, share them with friends. I encourage you to get your friends to follow Aussie Comedy Network. You guys know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to spread joy as far as I can, get the people laughing. So please, if you can, share a few clips out. Let your friends and family know there's something there for everyone. We've got a lot of exciting things on the way. I'll keep you updated on all the cool little bits and pieces as we go through the journey together. If you want to come see a show and enjoy some fun in person, Footscray Comedy Club, check that out on Instagram. We've got a website as well. Our next show is, not for a few weeks actually, Pride, which is a great gig on the 24th. Come down, check out his show sometime soon, particularly if you're West Side. It's one of the best nights out in town. I guarantee it. What else have I got going on? That's really about it, really. If you love the podcast, and I hope you do, share it with your friends, share it with family. Get people, integrated into this. And I'm trying to build a community of goodwill and positivity. And if there are people in their lives that you think will relate to this, share it with them. And then also all that usual good stuff. Like and subscribe, Spotify, YouTube in particular. Get us 5 stars, get me up those charts. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys. This was a long one. But, I think a nice way to round out this little series. And look, thank you very much for your time and attention. And I will see you again next week. We are back to normal programming. All right. Ciao for now.